I will be honest, this story still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. The night my best friend Melanie showed up at my front door, barefoot, soaked from the rain, holding one cracked phone and a black suitcase with the zipper half broken, I thought I was looking at a woman who had finally escaped something dangerous. I did not know I was looking at the person who would bring the danger into my home. I did not know that by opening my door, giving her a towel, and telling her she could sleep in my guest room for a few nights, I was handing her the quietest kind of power over my life. And I definitely did not know that 3 months later, I would be sitting across from a police officer in a small interview room, trying to explain why my name was on a loan I had never taken, why my savings account was nearly empty, and why my own neighbors believed I was the cruel one. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 38 years old, and at the time this all started, I lived alone in a small two-bedroom house outside Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of neighborhood where people waved while walking their dogs, kids left bikes in the driveway, and everyone pretended not to notice when someone else's life started falling apart. Melanie and I had been friends for almost 9 years, which was long enough for me to stop questioning certain things, long enough for her birthday to be written on my calendar in permanent ink, and long enough for me to believe that when she cried, I should listen before I judged. She had always called me her safe person, and I used to feel proud of that, because after my divorce, when I was trying to rebuild my own life from scratch, being needed by someone made me feel useful again. Almost like the pain I had survived had turned me into someone stronger and wiser. But looking back now, I can see how carefully she trained me to feel responsible for her emotions. At first, it was small things, the kind of things that did not look toxic when they happened one at a time, like calling me at midnight because she was spiraling, canceling plans after I had already driven across town, or making little comments about how lucky I was to have a stable job, a clean house, and the kind of life people like her never got. Whenever I tried to set a boundary, she would go quiet, and that silence always felt like punishment, because Melanie knew exactly how to make me feel like a bad person without ever raising her voice. So when she arrived that rainy Thursday night, shaking on my porch and whispering that her boyfriend Derek had thrown her out after a terrible fight, I did what I had been conditioned to do. I opened the door. She stepped inside like she had been waiting for permission to collapse, and the second she crossed my hallway, she dropped her suitcase, covered her face, and sobbed so hard that my dog hid under the kitchen table. I wrapped a towel around her shoulders, made peppermint tea because that was what my mother used to make when someone was upset, and sat beside her on the couch while she told me Derek had called her useless, blocked her credit card, and threatened to keep everything she owned unless she came back and apologized. The story came out in broken pieces, and every piece made me angrier on her behalf, because nobody wants to believe their friend might be leaving out half the truth when she is crying into your throw pillow. She said she only needed 2 weeks, maybe 3 at most, just enough time to find a cheap apartment, get her paycheck sorted out, and breathe without Derek watching her every move. I remember telling her, "You can stay as long as you need," and the moment those words left my mouth, she looked up at me with this strange softness in her eyes, almost like relief, but not quite. At the time, I thought she was grateful. Now I know she was calculating. The first few days felt almost peaceful because Melanie became the perfect houseguest in a way that made me feel guilty for ever having doubts about her. She washed dishes before I woke up, folded blankets with military neatness, walked my dog without being asked, and left little sticky notes on my coffee maker that said things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Then, slowly, the warmth started shifting into something heavier. She began waiting for me to come home from work, sitting at my kitchen island with red eyes and a glass of wine, ready to tell me something else Derek had supposedly done, something worse than the night before, something that made me postpone my errands, cancel my gym class, or sit with her until midnight while my own life got smaller around her crisis. One evening, about a week after she moved in, I came home exhausted after a brutal day at the insurance office, and before I had even taken off my coat, she told me Derek had somehow drained her checking account. She said the bank would not help until Monday, her phone bill was due, her car insurance was about to lapse, and if she missed one more payment, she would lose the only thing keeping her employable. I should have asked to see the bank notice. I should have paused, taken a breath, and remembered that emergencies are exactly when manipulators push hardest. Instead, I sat beside her at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and sent her $800 through Zelle while she cried into her hands and promised she would pay me back the second her direct deposit hit. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and for one foolish second, I felt like I had done something noble. But the next morning, when I walked into the guest room to drop off clean towels, I saw her suitcase open on the bed, and inside it, tucked beneath a pile of clothes, was a brand new designer purse with the tags still attached. I stood there staring at it, feeling something cold move through my chest. Then her phone lit up on the nightstand. A message flashed across the screen from Derek. It said, "Did she give you the money yet?" For a few seconds, I simply stood there in the doorway, holding those clean towels against my chest like they were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. The message on Melanie's phone was still glowing on the nightstand. "Did she give you the money yet?" It was only 7 words, but they changed the air in that room so completely that I suddenly became aware of every little detail around me. The wet towel she had left on the floor, the expensive perfume bottle beside the lamp, the designer purse hidden under her clothes, and the sickening realization that none of it looked like a woman who had been financially trapped by an abusive boyfriend. My first instinct was not anger. It was denial. I told myself there had to be an explanation, because when you love someone, or when you have spent years believing someone is fragile, wounded, and misunderstood, your brain will work embarrassingly hard to protect the story you already accepted. Maybe Derek was mocking her. Maybe he knew I had helped. Maybe the purse was fake or borrowed, or something she bought before everything happened. Maybe I was standing in my own guest room, suspicious of a woman who had trusted me with her pain, and maybe that made me the terrible friend. That was the thing about Melanie. Even when she was not speaking, she had trained my guilt to speak for her. I placed the towels on the edge of the bed, backed out quietly, and went downstairs with my heart beating so loudly that I could barely hear my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. She was in the kitchen, humming softly while scrolling through her tablet, wearing one of my oversized sweatshirts and drinking coffee from my favorite mug, as if she had already settled into the shape of my life. When she looked up and smiled at me, I almost hated myself for noticing how quickly her face changed, because for one tiny second before the smile appeared, there was something sharp in her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked, and her voice was so gentle that I nearly convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. I wanted to ask her directly. I wanted to say, "Why is Derek texting you about my money?" But instead, I said, "Yeah, I just brought you towels." That was my second mistake. My first mistake was opening the door. My second was seeing the truth and choosing silence, because I was afraid of what would happen if I finally named it. Over the next few days, Melanie became sweeter than ever, and now I understand that kindness can be used like a curtain, soft enough to hide the mess behind it, pretty enough to make you feel ashamed for pulling it open. She cooked dinner one night, baked banana bread the next morning, and posted a photo of my kitchen on Instagram with the caption, "Some people are proof that angels exist." My coworkers saw it. My sister saw it. My neighbor across the street saw it. And just like that, before I had even decided what I believed, Melanie had publicly turned me into her rescuer. That sounds harmless until you understand what it did to me. It made every boundary look like betrayal. It made every doubt look cruel. It made me feel watched by an invisible audience that expected me to keep being generous, patient, and endlessly available, because if I suddenly pulled back, I would not just be disappointing Melanie. I would be destroying the version of myself she had already advertised to everyone. The first real crack came on a Saturday morning when I found a grocery receipt in the trash for $146, paid with my debit card, from a store I had not visited in weeks. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake because I kept my debit card in my wallet, and my wallet stayed in my purse, and my purse stayed in my bedroom unless I was leaving the house. Then I remembered the night before, when Melanie had offered to grab takeout because I was buried in work emails, and she had walked upstairs to borrow a charger while I sat in the living room with my laptop open. The receipt listed wine, expensive cheese, organic skincare, a silk sleep mask, and a brand of shampoo that cost more than I usually spent on gas. I stood over the trash can, reading it twice, then a third time, while my face got hot and my hands started shaking. When Melanie came downstairs, wrapped in my robe like she owned the morning, I held up the receipt and asked her as calmly as I could why my card had been used at Harris Teeter. She blinked once. Then she laughed. Not loudly, not nervously, just a small, wounded laugh, like I had embarrassed both of us. "Oh my God, Claire," she said, pressing one hand to her chest. "I thought you said to use your card for groceries, because you knew I was waiting for the bank to fix my account." I had not said that. I knew I had not said that. But the way she said it made the room tilt slightly, because she did not defend herself like someone caught stealing. She looked at me like I was confused, forgetful, maybe even unstable. I said I'd cover dinner, I told her, trying to keep my voice steady, not a full shopping trip. Her eyes filled with tears so fast it almost frightened me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, turning away from me. "I guess I misunderstood. But I honestly thought you wanted me to feel safe here." There it was. Not an apology. A hook. She had taken my question and turned it into a test of my compassion, and somehow, within 30 seconds, I was the one explaining myself while she stood at the sink crying quietly enough to make me feel monstrous. I told her it was okay. I told her we just needed clearer communication. I told her I understood she was under pressure. And every sentence I spoke felt like one more brick being placed over the part of me that knew something was very, very wrong. That afternoon, I checked my bank account for the first time in days. There were 3 charges I did not recognize. A gas station, a boutique downtown, a subscription service under a name I had never seen before. The total was not huge, not the kind of amount that makes you call the police immediately, but it was enough to make my stomach drop, because theft does not become theft only when it ruins you. Sometimes it starts small, just small enough to make you doubt whether it is worth confronting. I changed my card PIN that night. I moved my wallet into the locked drawer in my bedroom. I told myself I was being careful, not suspicious. But Melanie noticed. Of course she noticed. The next morning, she was quiet in a way that made the whole house feel colder, moving through the kitchen without looking at me, closing cabinets a little too hard, sighing like a woman carrying a pain too noble to explain. By lunch, she had posted another Instagram story. It was just a black screen with white text. "It hurts when the people you trust start treating you like a burden." No names. No details. Just enough for people to wonder. Within an hour, 2 mutual friends texted me asking if everything was okay between us, and one of them actually said, "Melanie has been through so much, Claire, so please be gentle with her." That was when I understood something that scared me more than the missing money. Melanie was not just staying in my house. She was building a case against me while sleeping under my roof. And that night, after she said she was going to bed early, I heard her whispering on the phone behind the guest room door. I should have walked away. I should have protected myself quietly. But I leaned closer, and then I heard her say my name. I froze outside that guest room door, with one hand resting against the hallway wall and my breath caught somewhere high in my chest, because the moment Melanie said my name in that low, careful voice, every part of me understood that I was hearing something I had never been meant to hear. She was not crying. She was not shaking. She was not whispering like a woman afraid of the man who had supposedly ruined her life. She sounded calm, focused, almost bored, and that frightened me more than any screaming would have. "No, Claire doesn't know anything," she said, and there was a small pause before she added, "She's easy, but she's not stupid, so we have to slow down." My whole body went cold. I remember staring at the thin strip of light beneath the door, watching her shadow move across it, while my mind tried to drag me backward into denial, into excuses, into that soft and dangerous place where I could still pretend this was all some misunderstanding. But then she laughed. It was quiet, almost breathy, but it was real. And when I heard that laugh, something inside me cracked in a way I could not repair. For 9 years, I had listened to Melanie cry about broken relationships, unfair bosses, jealous women, cruel landlords, abusive men, and family members who supposedly abandoned her. And I had believed every version because she always told her stories with the same trembling voice and the same wounded eyes. Now, standing outside the room where I had let her sleep, I wondered how many of those stories had been rehearsed. I wondered how many people had opened their doors before me. And I wondered why I had never asked what happened to the last safe person she used to mention, a woman named Rachel who had mysteriously disappeared from her life after what Melanie called a heartless betrayal. Behind the door, Melanie lowered her voice, and I had to lean closer to hear her. She changed the pin, she whispered, but I already got enough for now, and once I get her to cosign, we're fine. Cosign. That word hit me so hard I almost stepped backward. A few nights earlier, she had mentioned a small apartment complex near her job, saying the manager required strong credit because her score had been destroyed by Derek, and she had looked so embarrassed when she asked whether I might consider being a reference. A reference. That was the word she used. Not cosigner. Not guarantor. Not legally responsible. A reference. I had told her we could talk about it after she found the paperwork, and she had hugged me like I had just saved her life. But now I understood that she had already decided what my signature was supposed to become. My pulse started pounding in my ears, and for one wild second, I imagined opening the door, turning on the light, and demanding to know who she was talking to. But fear stopped me. Not fear of Melanie hurting me physically, although for the first time, I did not know what she was capable of. It was a deeper fear, the fear of realizing that someone who knew your routines, your passwords, your grief, your family history, and the exact shape of your guilt had been studying you like a locked house she planned to enter. I backed away slowly, step by step, until I reached my bedroom. Then I locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed for almost an hour, holding my phone, scrolling through my banking app, my credit report, my email, and every message Melanie had sent me in the last month. The pattern was there, but I had been too emotionally exhausted to see it. Every emergency came right after payday. Every apology came right before another request. Every public post about my kindness appeared after I questioned something. Every time I created distance, she created witnesses. By 2 in the morning, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type, but I still created new passwords for my bank, my email, my phone provider, and every account I could think of. Then I searched my name online. At first, nothing strange appeared. Then I checked my email trash folder because some instinct I still cannot explain told me to look somewhere messy, somewhere people forget to clean. That was when I found the first confirmation message. It was from a lending company I had never contacted. The subject line said, "Your application is almost complete." I opened it with my heart in my throat. The message thanked me for starting a personal loan application for $12,000 and said the final step required identity verification and an electronic signature. My name was there. My address was there. The last 4 digits of my social security number were there. I felt the room tilt around me. This was not about groceries. This was not about a few unauthorized charges. This was not a desperate friend crossing a line because she was scared. This was something planned, something patient, something that had been moving through my life while I was sleeping 10 feet away. I wanted to call someone, but it was the middle of the night, and shame has a cruel way of making emergencies feel private. So I did the one thing that made sense at the time. I took screenshots. I photographed the receipt. I saved the bank charges. I forwarded the loan email to a new account Melanie did not know existed. And then, because I suddenly remembered the designer purse in her suitcase, I opened my bedroom door as quietly as I could and stepped back into the hallway. The house was dark. The guest room door was closed. No sound came from inside. I knew it was wrong to enter the room while she was sleeping, but I also knew the old version of me, the version that waited for permission to protect herself, had nearly gotten me destroyed. I turned the knob slowly. The room was empty. The bed was made. The suitcase was gone. For a moment, I thought she had left. Then I heard a soft creak downstairs. My stomach dropped. I moved toward the railing and looked over the banister. Melanie was standing in my home office, barefoot, wearing my robe, with the desk lamp on and my file cabinet open. In her hand was the folder that held my divorce papers, my tax returns, and the spare copy of my birth certificate. And when she looked up and saw me standing there, she did not look surprised. She smiled. Melanie smiled at me like I had walked into her room, not my own office, and for one frozen second, that smile scared me more than the open file cabinet, more than the folder in her hand, more than the fact that she was standing barefoot in the dark with my private documents pressed against her chest. "Claire," she said softly, almost like she was disappointed in me, "you scared me." I held the railing so tightly my fingers started to ache, because something about the calmness in her voice told me she had already prepared for this moment. "What are you doing in my office?" I asked, and even though I tried to sound firm, my voice came out thin and strange. She looked down at the folder, then back up at me, and her face shifted into that familiar wounded expression I had seen 100 times before. "I was looking for the apartment paperwork," she said, blinking slowly. "You told me it might be in here." I had never told her that. There was no apartment paperwork in my office. And she knew it. I walked down the stairs one step at a time, feeling every board creak under my feet, while she stood there in my robe, under my lamp, beside my open cabinet, still acting like I was the one making things uncomfortable. "Put the folder down," I said. Her eyes changed. It was quick, barely a flicker, but I saw it. The tears disappeared before they even arrived. The soft voice stayed, but the softness underneath it was gone. "You're really going to do this right now?" she asked, hugging the folder closer. "After everything I've been through?" That sentence used to work on me. It used to make me pause, apologize, soften my tone, and remember every sad story she had ever told me. But now I was looking at my divorce records, my tax returns, and my birth certificate in her hands, and I finally understood that her pain had become a weapon because I had kept handing her the handle. "I heard you on the phone," I said. For the first time, she went completely still. The house felt silent in a way I had never heard before, as if even the refrigerator had stopped humming because it wanted to know what she would say next. She stared at me for a long moment, then tilted her head slightly. "What exactly do you think you heard?" It was such a careful question. Not, "That did not happen." Not, "I can explain." She wanted to know how much I knew before she chose her next version of the story. That was the moment my sadness finally became anger. Not loud anger, not dramatic anger, but a clean and steady anger that made my hands stop shaking. "I heard you say I'd changed the PIN," I told her. "I heard you say you already got enough for now, and I heard you say once you got me to co-sign, you'd be fine." She stared at me, and for a few seconds, I almost thought she might drop the act. Then she laughed. It was small, sharp, and unbelievably cruel. "Wow," she said. "You've been standing outside my door listening to private conversations?" I remember feeling almost dizzy from how quickly she turned the room around, because I had just caught her holding my identity in her hands, and somehow she still managed to speak like I was the dangerous one. "You used my card," I said. "You started a loan application in my name." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out right away. And that silence told me more than any confession could have. Then she set the folder on the desk very carefully, like she wanted me to notice how reasonable she was being. "Claire, you need to calm down," she said. "You're exhausted, you're paranoid, and honestly, I think being alone in this house has been messing with your head." There it was again. The little twist of the knife. Not only was I wrong, I was unstable. I felt the old fear rise in me, that familiar panic that maybe I was overreacting, maybe I sounded crazy, maybe I would regret confronting her. But then I looked at my open file cabinet. I looked at the folder. I looked at the purse sitting beside her suitcase near the office door. And I thought, no, this is not confusion. This is not friendship. This is just insane. The words landed inside me with such force that I almost said them out loud. This was insane. A woman I had fed, housed, protected, defended, and comforted was standing in my office in the middle of the night, holding the documents she needed to steal my name, while calmly trying to convince me that my own eyes could not be trusted. I walked to the desk and picked up the folder. She did not stop me, but her face tightened. "I want you out tomorrow," I said. Her expression changed so fast it almost looked like a mask slipping. "Excuse me." You heard me, I said. You need to leave tomorrow. She took one step toward me. Not enough to threaten me, just enough to remind me she was in my space. After everything I did for you, she whispered. I almost laughed because the sentence was so backwards it made my chest hurt. What did you do for me, Melanie? Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears looked forced, like something she had pulled from a drawer. I was there after your divorce, she said. I listened to you cry about Mark. I helped you feel like a person again. And now, because of one misunderstanding, you're throwing me out like trash? My ex-husband's name in her mouth made something inside me harden. She knew exactly where to press. She knew exactly which memory still made me feel ashamed. But she had pressed too hard. This is not about Mark, I said. And this is not one misunderstanding. She crossed her arms and looked toward the front window, where the curtains were still open just enough for the porch light to cut through the room. You know what people are going to think, she asked quietly. I did not answer. They're going to think you took in a woman escaping a bad situation, then threw her onto the street because she needed too much help. My stomach turned. She was not pleading anymore. She was threatening me. And when I tell them you went through my things, she continued and stood outside my door listening and accused me of stealing because you couldn't handle sharing your perfect little house. They'll believe me, Claire. The way she said my name felt intimate and poisonous. I should have called the police right then. I should have told her to leave that second. But I was still learning how quickly a toxic person becomes dangerous when control starts slipping out of their hands. So I made a quieter choice. I picked up my phone from the desk and said, I'm recording this conversation. Her face went blank. Then she smiled again, but this time there was no warmth left in it. You always did need proof to feel brave, she said. Those words hit me harder than they should have, because they were not just cruel. They were accurate enough to hurt. I did need proof. I needed screenshots, receipts, recordings, documents, and timestamps because for years I had ignored my own instincts whenever someone sounded wounded enough. But maybe proof was not weakness. Maybe proof was the bridge between fear and freedom. I backed toward the hallway, keeping my phone in my hand, and told her we would talk in the morning when we were both calm. She watched me go with that same dead smile. Then, just before I reached the stairs, she said, You might want to check what you already signed. I stopped. My skin went cold. What does that mean? She shrugged, picked up her suitcase, and walked past me toward the guest room like the conversation was finished. I barely slept that night. At 6 a.m, while she was still behind the closed guest room door, I opened my laptop and searched my email again, this time using every word I could think of. Loan, lease, application, signature, guarantor. And then I found it. A document confirmation from 3 days earlier, buried inside a folder I never used, marked as completed through an electronic signing service. My name was on it. My digital signature was on it. And at the top of the agreement, in bold letters, was the name of an apartment complex I had never visited. But the worst part was not the lease. The worst part was the second applicant listed beneath Melanie's name. It was Derek. The moment I saw Derek's name under Melanie's, my body reacted before my mind could understand it, because my hands went cold, my throat tightened, and the room seemed to shrink around me as if the walls themselves knew I had not rescued a woman from danger, but had unknowingly helped two people use my life as a hiding place. For weeks, Melanie had told me Derek was controlling her, stealing from her, ruining her credit, and keeping her trapped, yet there he was on an apartment lease with her, connected to my forged signature, my credit history, my home address, and my name. As if I had agreed to become financially responsible for their fresh start. I clicked through the document with a sick feeling in my stomach, reading every page faster than my eyes could fully process, and by the time I reached the section that said I was listed as guarantor, meaning I could be held responsible if they stopped paying rent, damaged the apartment, or vanished, I had to stand up because I genuinely thought I might throw up. That was when I understood the real plan. Melanie had not moved into my house because she had nowhere to go. She had moved in because my house had documents, my computer, my passwords saved in the browser, my mail on the counter, and a lonely divorced woman inside it who still wanted to believe helping people meant they would not destroy her. I printed the lease. I printed the loan application. I printed the charges from my bank account. Then I took photos of the open file cabinet, the grocery receipt, the designer purse, and every message I could find that showed Melanie asking for help, twisting my words, or turning small boundaries into proof that I was cruel. By 7:30, she walked into the kitchen wearing a calm face and carrying her coffee like she had not just blown a hole through my life. "You were loud this morning," she said, sitting at the island. "Didn't sleep well?" I placed the printed lease in front of her. She looked down at it, then back at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not reach for tears. She reached for attitude. "You went through my private documents?" "My signature is on that lease," I said, keeping my voice low because I knew if I yelled, she would use that too. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and gave me a look I had only seen her give waitresses, receptionists, and other women she wanted to make feel small. "You said you would help me get approved," she said. "Don't rewrite history because you're suddenly scared." "I said I could be a reference," I answered. "I never agreed to be a guarantor, and I never agreed to anything involving Derek." At the mention of his name, her jaw tightened. "Not much. Enough. So now you're judging me for going back?" She asked, and there it was again, the trapdoor under every sentence, because if I focused on Derek, she could make this about trauma, love, fear, and forgiveness instead of fraud. "I am judging the forged signature," I said. For 1 second, the kitchen went completely still. Then she smiled. "You can't prove that." For words. No crying, no shaking, no wounded friend asking how I could think such a thing. Just 4 words from a woman who had finally stopped pretending because she believed she had already gotten far enough. Something in me went quiet. I picked up my phone, opened the recording app, and said, "Can you repeat that?" Her eyes flicked to the screen. The smile disappeared. "You are insane," she whispered. "No," I said. I was trusting. That was the cleanest truth I had said in years. I called the apartment complex while she sat there watching me, and when the leasing manager answered, I put the phone on speaker and explained that my name had been used as a guarantor without my consent, that I had not signed the document, and that I needed the file frozen immediately while I filed a police report. Melanie stood up so fast the chair scraped across the tile. "Hang up," she said. I did not. The leasing manager sounded nervous, then professional, then very careful, and she told me the application had been submitted online, approved with uploaded identification, and finalized using an electronic signature from an email address that looked almost identical to mine, except one letter had been changed. One letter. That was how close they had come. Not a stranger in another state. Not some faceless criminal. My best friend in my guest room, using an email address designed to look like mine, while drinking my coffee and posting about angels in my kitchen. Melanie grabbed the lease from the counter, but I had already made copies, and when I told the manager I wanted every IP log, timestamp, uploaded file, and signature record preserved, Melanie's face changed from angry to panicked. "Claire," she said, and this time her voice was softer, "please don't do this." That almost worked. Not because I believed her. Because the old version of me still hated seeing anyone beg. But then she added, "Derek will lose everything." And there it was. Not, "I am sorry." Not, "I hurt you." Not, "I lied." Derek. Even in the middle of being caught, she was protecting the man she had used to get inside my house. I ended the call, put the papers into a folder, and told her she had 1 hour to pack while I waited on the porch with my neighbor across the street watching, because I no longer trusted myself to be alone with someone who could cry like a victim and plan like a thief. She stared at me for a long time. Then she laughed under her breath. "You really think your neighbors will pick you over me after what I tell them?" I did not answer because, honestly, I did not know. For 9 years, Melanie had collected people the way other women collected jewelry, keeping each one polished with secrets, favors, pity, and guilt until they were useful enough to wear in public. She went upstairs, and I heard drawers opening, hangers scraping, things being thrown into bags, but instead of relief, I felt dread, because toxic people rarely leave quietly when they cannot leave in control. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister. Claire, what is going on? Melanie just posted that you stole her documents and threatened to ruin her housing. Before I could answer, another text came in. Then another. Then another. By the time Melanie came down the stairs with her suitcase, my phone was shaking in my hand from nonstop messages, and she looked at it, smiled, and said, "I told you people would believe me." Then the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Derek was standing on my porch. Derek stood on my porch in a black hoodie, with both hands in his pockets and Melanie's car keys looped around one finger, and the first terrible thing I noticed was that he did not look like a man chasing a woman who had escaped him. He looked annoyed. Not heartbroken, not desperate, not violent, not even nervous. Just annoyed, like I had interrupted a plan that should have gone smoothly. Behind me, Melanie stopped at the bottom of the stairs with her suitcase in her hand, and when she saw him, she did not flinch, back away, or show any fear at all. She looked relieved. That small look told me more than all her stories ever had. "Claire," Derek said, glancing past me toward Melanie, "we can keep this simple." I almost laughed because that was exactly what people say when they know the truth is complicated, ugly, and already starting to slip out of their control. "You need to leave," I said, keeping one hand on the door and the other around my phone. He looked down at my phone, then at the papers tucked under my arm, and his face tightened just enough for me to know he understood what I had found. Melanie stepped closer behind me and said, in that sweet broken voice she used when an audience was present, "I just want my things, Claire. Please don't make this worse." It was amazing how quickly she could become fragile when someone was watching. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, was already standing across the street near her mailbox, pretending to sort through envelopes while staring directly at my porch, and for once I was grateful that suburban people loved drama more than privacy. "I'm not making it worse," I said. "I am making it documented." Derek exhaled through his nose, then leaned slightly toward me, not enough to touch me, but enough to make my body understand the message. "You don't want police involved," he said quietly. "Once people start digging, everybody gets dirty." That sentence froze me because it was not a denial. It was a warning. Melanie's eyes flicked toward him fast, sharp, and angry, as if he had said too much, and that was the first time I saw a crack between them. I raised my phone higher. "Say that again," I said. He smiled, but it looked forced now. "You're dramatic." "No," I said, "I'm recording." Melanie dropped the suitcase handle so hard it hit the floor. For a second, nobody moved. Then Derek's voice changed, softening into something almost reasonable, which somehow made him sound worse. "Look, the lease is already signed, the place is approved, and nobody needs to lose money if you just let it ride for a few months." Let it ride. My forged signature, my credit, my savings, my name attached to two people who had lied their way into my house, and he talked about it like a parking ticket. "You used my identity," I said. Melanie stepped around me, suddenly no longer crying, and snapped, "You offered to help me." "I offered you a room," I said. "You turned it into access." That shut her up. For 1 second, I saw something like hate in her face, not because I had insulted her, but because I had named the trick too clearly. Derek reached toward Melanie's suitcase, but I blocked the doorway with my shoulder and said, "She can take her clothes, but nothing from my office, nothing from my files, and nothing leaves until I check the bags." Melanie laughed, loud enough for Mrs. Alvarez to hear. "She's holding my things hostage now," she called out, raising her voice toward the street. "This is what I've been dealing with." Mrs. Alvarez did not move. She just lifted her phone. That was when Melanie realized the audience was not completely hers anymore. I called the police right there on the porch, not because I expected instant justice, but because I needed a clean record of the moment, the lease, the threats, the documents, the fraud. And the fact that Derek had arrived to collect her after she spent weeks telling me she was terrified of him. While we waited, Melanie paced near the stairs, texting furiously, and Derek stood by his car with his jaw clenched, pretending he was above the whole situation while checking the street every few seconds. Then my sister called. I ignored it. She called again. Then she texted, "Do not let Melanie leave with anything." She just sent me a screenshot of your social security card. I read that message 3 times before the meaning fully landed. My social security card had been locked in the same file cabinet Melanie had opened. I turned toward her, and she must have seen my face change because she immediately said, "What now? Where is it?" I asked, "Where is what?" "My social security card." Her expression went blank, too blank, and Derek looked at the ground. That was the moment I knew. I walked to the suitcase, unzipped the front pocket, and before Melanie could stop me, I pulled out a folded envelope with my name printed on it in my own handwriting. Inside were copies of my birth certificate, my social security card, 2 old tax forms, and a sticky note with 3 passwords I had written years ago and forgotten to destroy. For a second, I could not speak. Not because I was shocked anymore. Because shock had limits, and Melanie had already dragged me past them. She rushed toward me, but I stepped back and held the envelope up where Mrs. Alvarez could see it from across the street. Derek cursed under his breath. Melanie's mask finally broke. "You have no idea what he made me do," she said, pointing at Derek like she had just remembered she needed him to be the villain again. Derek's head snapped up. "Don't start that," he said. And there it was. The partnership cracking open right in front of me. Melanie turned to me with tears already forming, but they looked different now, messier and more desperate, because this time she was not performing control. She was losing it. "He said we needed someone with clean credit," she whispered. "He said it was temporary." Derek laughed bitterly. "You picked her," he said. "You said she was lonely enough to do anything if you cried." The words hit me so hard I felt them in my knees. Lonely enough. That was the version of me they had discussed behind my back. Not kind. Not loyal. Not generous. Lonely enough. By the time the officers arrived, Melanie was sobbing. Derek was denying everything. My phone was full of messages from people who had believed her posts, and I was standing on my own porch holding proof that my best friend had not only stolen from me, but studied the weakest part of me and built a plan around it. One officer separated us. The other looked through the envelope, the lease copies, the bank charges, and the screenshots, and his expression changed from routine patience to something colder. He asked Melanie if she had permission to possess my documents. She said nothing. He asked Derek if he lived at my address. Derek said no. Then the officer looked at me and asked the question that made my stomach twist all over again. "Ma'am, do you know there are 2 more credit applications attached to your name?" I stared at him. "What?" He turned the tablet slightly, showing me a screen I could not fully read from where I stood. "One for a car," he said, "and one for a business line of credit." Melanie made a small sound behind me. Not crying. Not denial. Fear. And when I turned around, she was looking at Derek like she had just realized he had used her too. When the officer said there were 2 more credit applications attached to my name, Melanie stopped crying so suddenly that the silence around her felt louder than any confession she could have made. She looked at Derek first, not at me, and that single look told me she had known about the lease. She had known about the documents. She had known about the fake email address. But she had not known he had gone beyond the plan they made together. Derek saw it too. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped, stepping away from his car. "You handed me the documents." Melanie's face went white. "I handed you what we needed for the apartment," she said, and her voice cracked, not with guilt for me, but with panic for herself. "You said we were done after that." The officer raised one hand and told them both to stop talking, but the damage had already been done, because Derek had just admitted she gave him my documents, and Melanie had just admitted there was a plan. I stood there holding the envelope, feeling strangely calm now, because once betrayal becomes clear enough, your body stops begging for comfort and starts looking for exits. The officers took statements separately, photographed the documents, gave me a case number, and told me to contact all 3 credit bureaus, my bank, the leasing office, the lender, and the identity theft department as soon as possible. It sounded simple when they said it. It was not simple. It was my name scattered across forms I never signed, my credit tied to strangers' decisions, My home turned into evidence, and my best friend standing 10 feet away, trying to decide whether to cry, lie, or sacrifice Derek first. Before they left, one officer told Melanie she could take only the belongings I could confirm were hers, and when I insisted on checking every bag in front of them, she looked at me with pure hatred. Not sadness. Not shame. Hatred. "You're enjoying this," she whispered as I pulled my missing phone charger, a bottle of my perfume, and my spare house key from the side pocket of her suitcase. I held up the key. The officer looked at her. Melanie immediately said she gave me that. I had not. The officer took it, placed it in a small evidence bag, and for the first time that morning, Melanie looked less like a victim and more like a woman who had run out of costumes. Derek left first, after one officer warned him not to contact me, and Melanie watched his car pull away with an expression I could not read. Then she turned to me, lowered her voice, and said, "He will ruin both of us now." That was the closest thing to honesty she had given me. I did not answer. I watched her drag her suitcase down my walkway while Mrs. Alvarez stood by her mailbox, still holding her phone, and when Melanie reached the sidewalk, she turned back like she wanted one final scene. "You were never my friend," she called out. "You just liked feeling needed." The words landed exactly where she aimed them. For a second, they hurt. Then they didn't. Because maybe part of that was true. Maybe I had liked feeling needed. Maybe I had confused rescue with connection, pity with loyalty, and someone's dependence on me with proof that I mattered. But none of that gave her the right to steal my name. After she left, I locked the door, changed the alarm code, pushed a chair against the office cabinet like that would somehow repair everything, and sat at my kitchen table with the police case number in front of me. Then the real work began. I froze my credit. I called my bank. I filed fraud reports. I changed every password. I ordered a new social security card, alerted the IRS, contacted the apartment complex again, and spent 40 minutes explaining to a customer service representative that yes, the signature looked like mine because someone had used my name, my documents, and an email address one letter away from my real one. By noon, my head felt full of glass. By 3, my sister arrived. She did not knock. She walked in with 2 coffees, 1 legal pad, and the face she used when she was furious enough to become useful. "I owe you an apology," she said before I could speak. I almost broke down right there. She told me Melanie had sent messages to half our circle before dawn, saying I had become paranoid, controlling, and cruel, and that I was trying to sabotage her chance at housing because I couldn't stand being abandoned again. That line hit hard because it used my divorce, my loneliness, and my private fears as weapons in public. My sister pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots. Melanie had not just defended herself. She had built a story. In her version, I had offered to co-sign, regretted it, then tried to frame her as a thief because I was embarrassed about changing my mind. There were crying selfies. There were vague posts. There were comments from women I had hosted for dinner, women who had eaten at my table, women who now wrote things like, "I knew Claire had control issues," and "Melanie, stay strong. Some people only help so they can own you." I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, my sister put her hand on mine and said, "We are not fighting feelings with feelings, Claire. We are fighting lies with records." So we made a timeline. Not a dramatic post. Not a long emotional defense. A timeline. The night she arrived. The Zelle payment. The unauthorized charges. The message from Derek. The fake email. The lease. The police report. The documents in her suitcase. The credit applications. By evening, I sent one clean message to our closest mutual friends, with no insults, no pleading, no paragraphs about my pain, just facts, screenshots, the case number, and a sentence saying I would not discuss it further outside the investigation. The replies changed fast. Some people apologized. Some went quiet. Some still chose Melanie because people hate admitting they were manipulated, especially when believing the lie made them feel kind. But one message came in at 9:14 p.m. from a number I did not recognize. "This is Rachel. I heard Melanie is staying with you. Please tell me you didn't sign anything for her." I stared at the screen. Rachel. The old friend Melanie had once described as jealous, cruel, unstable, and heartless. The woman who had supposedly abandoned her during the worst year of her life. My hands started shaking again, but this time it was not fear. It was recognition. I called her. Rachel answered on the first ring, and before I could even explain what had happened, she said, "Let me guess." She showed up crying, said she had nowhere to go, made you feel like her only safe place. Then somehow your money, your documents, or your reputation became the price of proving you loved her. I closed my eyes. Yes, I whispered. Rachel exhaled like someone who had been waiting years to hear that single word. Then she told me something that made the whole story darker. Melanie had done it before. Not exactly the same way, not with the same man, not with the same paperwork, but the pattern was almost identical. Emergency, pity, free place to stay, borrowed money, missing documents, public victim posts. Then a final explosion where Rachel became the villain and Melanie disappeared into someone else's sympathy. She doesn't just use people, Rachel said. She studies what they're ashamed of, then makes them pay to hide it. I looked around my kitchen at the coffee cups, the legal pad, the locked office door, and the guest room upstairs where Melanie had slept like a sister while planning like an enemy. Then Rachel said, "Claire, there's one more thing you need to know before you talk to the detective." My breath stopped. What? Rachel's voice lowered. Derek wasn't her boyfriend when this started, she said. He was her husband. Rachel's words sat in my ear like a warning bell, because if Derek had been Melanie's husband the whole time, then every tear, every whispered story, every trembling sentence about escaping him had not just been a lie, but a doorway she had built so I would invite the danger inside myself. I asked Rachel to repeat it, even though I had heard her clearly, and she told me that Melanie and Derek had married 2 years earlier in South Carolina, separated publicly whenever money got tight, then reappeared in someone else's life with a fresh emergency, a broken story, and a victim act polished enough to make reasonable people ashamed of doubting her. The next morning, I gave the detective Rachel's number, the lease, the fake email address, the bank charges, the screenshots, the recording, and the envelope from Melanie's suitcase, and for once, instead of trying to explain my emotions, I let the evidence speak in the order it happened. That changed everything. The apartment complex voided the guarantor agreement after confirming the email address was not mine. The lending company froze the personal loan before the money released. And the car application was stopped only because the dealership had asked for one more identity check before approval. The business line of credit was the ugliest one. Derek had tried to open it under a small moving company name, using my information as a financial backer, which meant they were not only trying to get a place to live, but also trying to build a whole new mess with my credit standing underneath it. When the detective explained that to me, I stopped feeling foolish and started feeling lucky. Not safe. Lucky. Because if I had waited one more week, if I had ignored one more charge, if I had told myself one more time that Melanie was just struggling, I could have spent years cleaning up damage from people who had already packed their bags before the bills arrived. Melanie texted me from 3 different numbers during the investigation. First, she begged. Then she blamed Derek. Then she blamed me. Her last message said, "You could have just let me land on my feet, but you had to destroy me to feel powerful." I did not answer. That was new for me. The old Claire would have written 5 paragraphs, explaining that I had loved her, that I had tried, that she had hurt me, and that I wanted her to understand what she had done. But toxic people do not want understanding when accountability is the price. They want a reaction they can twist into proof. So I sent every message to the detective, blocked the number, and let silence become the one thing she could not use against me. The fallout was not clean. Some friends apologized with real shame in their voices. Some pretended they had never taken sides, and a few disappeared because admitting Melanie had fooled them meant admitting they had helped her isolate me. My sister stayed close. Mrs. Alvarez brought soup twice, which was her way of saying she had seen enough from across the street to know I was not crazy. Rachel and I spoke for nearly 2 hours one night, comparing timelines, names, patterns, and the horrible little details that made us both realize Melanie had not simply betrayed us. She had selected us because we were generous women with old wounds and too much fear of seeming cruel. 3 months later, I saw Melanie in court. She looked smaller than I remembered, not because she was broken, but because I was finally looking at her without the fog of pity. Derek stood on the other side of the hallway, refusing to look at her, while his attorney spoke quietly beside him, and Melanie kept glancing at me like she still expected some soft part of me to open and save her from the consequences she had invited. It did not. The criminal case moved slowly, like these things often do, and I will not pretend justice arrived like a movie ending with one sharp sentence and a door slamming shut. But the lease was canceled, the credit applications were blocked, my bank reversed the charges after the fraud review, and both Melanie and Derek ended up facing consequences that finally had nothing to do with my guilt. I still had damage. My credit alerts stayed on for months. My trust felt bruised. My house felt different, especially the guest room, where I could not pass the doorway without remembering the suitcase, the robe, the purse, and that message from Derek asking whether she had gotten the money yet. So I changed the room. I painted the walls deep green, sold the bed, turned it into a small office, and placed a locking cabinet against the wall where the nightstand used to be. It sounds simple, but that room became the first place in my life where I stopped confusing openness with access. A year later, Rachel sent me one final message. She had heard Melanie was telling people she had been betrayed by two jealous women who could not stand seeing her rebuild. I read it once, felt the old sting rise, then fade, and I deleted the screenshot without forwarding it to anyone. That was the moment I knew I was really healing. Not because Melanie told the truth. She probably never would. But because I no longer needed strangers to understand the whole story before I allowed myself to be free from it. The hardest lesson was not that people can lie. I already knew that. The hardest lesson was that someone can cry in your kitchen, sleep under your roof, call you family, learn every soft place in your heart, and still see you as an opportunity instead of a person. I do not hate Melanie now. Hate would still keep me tied to her. What I feel is something quieter, colder, and healthier. I believe what happened. I believe my own memory. I believe the bank statements, the documents, the doorbell footage, the messages, the fear in my body, and the voice inside me that had been whispering the truth long before I was brave enough to listen. Sometimes people ask why I did not see it sooner. The answer is simple. I was not blind. I was loyal to someone who used loyalty as a lock. Now, when someone enters my life with constant emergencies, missing details, dramatic enemies, and stories where they are always the victim, but never responsible for anything, I do not rush to become their safe place. I slow down. I ask questions. I protect my money. I protect my documents. And most importantly, I no longer mistake someone's need for my obligation. Because the night Melanie stood on my porch with that broken suitcase, I thought she needed shelter from a storm. But the storm was not behind her. It was her. And the only reason I survived it was because one message lit up on her phone before she could finish turning my life into hers.